I'm gonna move on to my next ghost story, and I really, really want to tell you this one. This one happened when I was about 10 years old, and it happened at my grandma and step-grandpa's house on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. And Salt Spring Island is like a tiny little island, and it's just right off the coast of Vancouver Island. So that's where this story starts. Both my grandparents have passed away, so Salt Spring is very special to me because I spent a lot of my summers there. It was an absolutely beautiful property that they owned, and there was all these like different sections to the property. So I want to give you a little lay of the land so you can visualize what the property looked like. Now, when you pull into the driveway, you would have to take the driveway for like a little while, and when you get to the end of the driveway, it just opened up and there's just this beautiful property. And then there was a huge path that went up this mountain, and there was like this hiking trail that went up the side of this mountain, and they owned all of the property right up this mountain, and the mountain went all the way up to a lake at the very top. So there was like this little lake that we loved going rowing on at the very top of this mountain. The house was half an older house that they developed into a newer house. So you look at one side, you see this older part of the house that they would call the cottage. And then on the other wing of the house was the brand new wing. So the houses were connected by a little foyer. I'm going to say foyer because I'm French, but all the Americans watching are going to be like, it's a foyer. The houses were connected by a little foyer right in between. When people came to stay at the house, the guests would stay in the cottage. And my grandparents had the entire like new wing to themselves. And this wing just went on. It just was huge. Oh, it was amazing. And then in the wing, there was like another wing that turned into like their bedroom. And then there was like a little library that my grandma had in there. It was big on that side, and in the cottage, it was older. There was like an older kitchen downstairs, and then upstairs were 3 bedrooms that all of like the families would stay in when everybody was coming to visit. So that is the cottage and the main wing, and this is very important to this story. If you think I'm rambling, this is very important. They were both retired, so for having a large amount of grandkids, the house totally made sense. We never got bored. Let's just put it that way. So let's start with this. Now, I was always surrounded by my cousins, but there was something about the property that I never felt comfortable walking anywhere on the property by myself. I never felt comfortable being alone in the house, anywhere, even outside on the property. I just always felt like something was behind me. Even like as a young kid, like even at the age of like 6, I was just like, ugh, like I always felt like something was behind me or following me or watching me. Okay, so here's the beginning with the Ouija board. So we had Christmas, and we had a whole bunch of families staying at the house during Christmas that year. It was always a really amazing, elaborate Christmas at Grandma's house. We all opened our presents in the living room together. We opened up all of our presents, and I don't know who gave me this present, but somebody in the family had given me a Ouija board. I don't know. Somebody gave me a Ouija board. I can't remember who it was or why. Maybe one of my family members watching can remind me who it was. I don't know who it was. My god cousins were there with us that Christmas, and my god cousin Sarah was like, Chrissy, like let's go into the cottage, into the kitchen in the cottage, and we're gonna go play with this Ouija board. You know, on Christmas Day, there's that awkward time in between when you open all your presents and you're waiting for Christmas dinner. There's like this 6-hour gap. That's what we were filling our time with. So we were like, we have all this time, let's go play with the Ouija board. So we laid it all out, and it was creeping me out. She was older than me, so she was really messing around with this Ouija board. So we were asking the Ouija board these questions, asking if there's a ghost around us or a spirit around us, and tell us your name and everything. And the Ouija board would spell out these very different names or patterns of letters that didn't make sense to us at the time. And I'll get into that. It was just very XGIEN, like very different spelling of things that we thought it was just gibberish and the board wasn't working. But years later, when I went back and really thought about it, I realized that it was actually spelling something. So anyways, so my parents called us for dinner. And so we left the Ouija board, put it away, and packed it up. And I literally packed it up until I was 14. Fast forward to the summer. Now, this was a very different trip to Salt Spring because I always went with my cousins. Like, there was never a time that I didn't have my cousins there or a family member with me. Yeah, and even then, like, I always had my brother with me, which was weird that he wasn't there. So this was a very different trip because I was getting dropped off by my dad. He like dropped me off at the ferry. And he's like, your grandma's gonna meet you on the other side. And I was like, okay, cool. So I sat on the ferry, grandma picked me up on the other side, and I went and stayed with grandma and grandpa for a week. I was gonna be there alone for a week. So I arrived at their house and I was eating lunch with my grandma, and she said, you know what, Chrissy, like you've got to sleep in the cottage because we really don't have anywhere for you to really sleep in the main part of the house. You know, usually you're here with your parents, so I'm sure you'll be totally fine sleeping in the cottage on your own. So 10-year-old Chrissy was like, yeah, sure, okay. And then it kind of started to sink in that the cottage is very detached from the main part of the house because there's that foyer in the middle. So I was starting to get a little nervous the more and more I thought about having to stay in the cottage by myself. As it became darker and darker outside, my grandma said, okay, we're gonna have dinner and then you're gonna get ready for bed. And I started to get really, really nervous about going to bed. I was still a little freaked out from the Ouija board experience too, so it just gave like a general vibe of creepiness to the cottage now. I was just feeling a little nervous. So my grandma got me ready for bed, took me upstairs in the cottage, and I went into one of the bedrooms and she set me up in the bed and she left and closed the door. Like, the cottage had a door between the foyer and the cottage. There was a privacy door so that families were staying there, they could stay up and not bother my grandparents in the other wing of the house, you know what I mean? I laid there literally for about 5 minutes in the dark in that room in the cottage, and I couldn't do it. So I grabbed my little blanket and pillow and I went down to my grandparents' room, and I just went into their room and they're like, oh, what are you doing in here? You know, you got to sleep in the cottage. And I said, no, I don't want to. And my grandma said, okay, fine. You can sleep on the floor in our room for one night. And I said, okay, deal. So the next day, my grandma and I, every time I went up there, we would always go for hikes up to the lake. Remember the lake I was telling you about at the top of the mountain? So my grandma and I loved hiking. That was something that we always did together, was go hiking every time I was at Salt Spring. My grandma and I, we had lunch. So we finished our sandwiches and she's like, okay, let's get on our hiking boots and go up to the lake. The walk from the house to the lake was about 20 minutes. So my grandma and I started to walk down the path and we started to walk up the mountain. And as we were walking, we noticed these really weird flowers that were popping up in these patches. And the patches were in like these box shapes. It was just patches of flowers. You would see like a patch of them and then they would stop. And then like over another couple of feet, you would see another patch of flowers, and then it would stop, and then it would go in like another patch of flowers like further down. And this happened like all the way up the hill, and we noticed it all the way up to the top of the mountain and all across the top of the mountain. And these are flowers that my grandma had never seen before. It was just very weird that she didn't ever notice these flowers. These flowers, they were clear. There was no color to them at all. These flowers were completely white. And we bent down to look at them and inspect them because my grandma was such a gardener. She was just fascinated with these flowers. As I was looking at these flowers, I felt very strange. It didn't feel good. It felt off. So my grandma and I carried on hiking, and we went up to the lake. We went for a row. So remember the library that I told you my grandma had in her wing of the house? In her library, she had all kinds of gardening books. And one of the gardening books was like an encyclopedia of gardening. So if there was a flower that you didn't know what it was, you could look at the index in the back of the encyclopedia and look up the properties or traits of the flower, and then you could figure out what flower it was in the encyclopedia part. So when we got home, we took the flower encyclopedia and we both sat together on the couch, and we go to the index and we looked up colorless flower. We found a match for colorless flowers, and so we go to the page that it says it's on, and the name of the flower was an Indian pipe, otherwise known as the death flower. The flower was called an Indian pipe, better known as the death plant. Native Americans used to use its stem juices in preparation of treatment of sore and or inflamed eyes. The Indian pipe is seen as either satanic or angelic according to who you ask. And as we read further, at the very bottom part of the description, it said that these flowers are known to only grow over ancient burial grounds. When we read that, my skin was crawling, and it was starting to become supper time. The sun was starting to go down, and I had to sleep in the cottage. We finished dinner, and then my grandma said, you know, Chrissy, you have to sleep in the cottage tonight. We made a deal. We have really nowhere for you to sleep in our part of the house. And I was like, okay. So in the cottage, when you go up the stairs, there's like 2 sets of stairs. So it would go like this, and then there was another staircase that went like that. And at the very top of that staircase, there was a landing. And in that landing, there was a little crib. That's like where my baby cousins and everything would all sleep. For some reason that night, I wanted to sleep in the crib. I think because I wanted to be as close as possible to my grandparents' part of the house. That way, I'm more kind of in the open and I'm somewhat closer to them because the bedrooms were far off behind. So what we did was we took a pillow and a blanket from the bed and we just put it in there, and Grandma said I could sleep in the crib. So Grandma tucked me in, and Grandma walked down the stairs to leave, and she shut the door to the cottage and just left it open a little crack. And then she walked over to her part of the house, went into her room, and went to bed. And I laid there for a while, and I really tried to get myself to go to sleep. I was laying there, and I was just about to go to sleep. You know, when you're just about to fall asleep. And I heard the cottage door creak open. And I thought it might have been my grandma. So I called down and I said, "Grandma? Grandma?" There was no answer. And I thought to myself, that's really weird. Somebody just opened that door. That's weird. Okay. So I thought maybe it was my grandpa. So I call out, "Grandpa? Grandpa?" No answer. The door creaks open even more. And I start to hear footsteps coming up the stairs. But it's not someone wearing shoes. It was bare feet. So I'm hearing these footsteps going up the stairs, and it's like, you know, bare feet on carpet. And they're walking so slowly, which is so weird. So I hear the stairs actually creaking underneath the sound of the feet touching the carpet. And I hear it going up one stair, then the next stair, then the next stair. And I'm laying there and I'm calling out again, and I said, "Grandma? Grandma?" And it stops. And I'm frozen in fear. And the footsteps start again. And it got to the top of the first set of stairs. And I call out, Grandma, Grandma, Grandpa, is that you? Who's there? Who's there? And it stops. And then it starts again. And it starts to come up the second flight of stairs. And you can hear the feet on the carpet. And it's almost at the top of the stairs. And that's right where I was. And I hear the footsteps getting closer and closer to the top of the stairs. And I screamed. Ah! It just stops right at the top of the stairs. And I'm screaming. Then I start to hear the footsteps going slowly back down the stairs. And these feet rubbing on the carpet. And I'm still screaming for my grandparents, but they're so far off in their other wing of the house that they probably can't hear me. And I just keep screaming and screaming, and I hear these footprints going back down the stairs, and then I hear the cottage door open, and then it closes all the way. And then the cottage door opens again, and I'm like, who is here? What is this now? And it's my grandma. And she comes up the stairs and she goes, what is the problem? What is happening? And she's like, you were screaming. What is happening? What is going on? And so I said to her, Grandma, somebody came through the cottage door. I heard it open and they came up the stairs. I don't know who it was. And then they went back down the stairs and the cottage door closed. And she said, the cottage door was closed when I just came in here. Who closed it? And I said, it wasn't me. I don't know. And so she said, okay, fine, get your blankets, come sleep on our floor again. I don't want you to sleep on our floor, but you're gonna sleep on our floor. And I slept on their floor for the rest of the week that I was at Salt Spring Island. Ever since then, I never went there by myself. I always had someone with me. I don't know what it was. It wasn't responding to me, but it had no shoes on. I couldn't explain for years what this was. Like, why would somebody be in the house with no shoes on? If someone was breaking into the house, they would have had shoes on. So I did a little research later on. In my last story, I told you I was up at university at UNBC. I was in First Nation studies for the first 3 years of my studies at UNBC. And we studied a lot of the First Nations bands and the ancestry of the First Nation people all across British Columbia. I was in the library researching for a paper and came across an article, The Ancestry of First Nations People on Salt Spring Island originated in the Fulford Harbor area, which is exactly where my grandparents' home was located. Now, that property was so extensive, and apparently the settlers had burial grounds in different spots around that part of the island. Here's where the spelling of the Ouija board comes into play. There's all kinds of different languages and dialects in the First Nations community, and you can see that the spelling to a 10-year-old would be like, what is this? I don't understand. This isn't spelling anything. But for someone who speaks English, these words would make no sense. But these are similar names and words that were spelled out on the Ouija board. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Those were the names spelled out on that Ouija board. And I believe that whoever came to visit me that night, it makes total sense why they wouldn't be wearing shoes, because there was no shoes back then. The sound that I heard on the carpet was definitely that of the bottom of a bare foot. I truly believe that there was a burial ground on the top of the mountain where we saw the flowers. So this all comes together, the Indian pipes, the Ouija board, and the something that came to visit me in the night. I believe that was the spirit or ghost of a First Nation settler that had passed. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed my story. Thank you so much for listening, and I just really appreciate all of your likes and subscribes and all of the positive feedback on my last video. So I hope you guys have an absolutely amazing day. I hope you have an amazing Halloween, and thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!